The Cold War, a time of tension, a period marked by an intense rivalry between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. This was not just a battle of ideologies, but a show of military might and technological prowess, a time of superpowers facing off. The seas became a new battleground, where naval fleets showcased their strength and readiness. The oceans were patrolled by formidable ships, each one a floating fortress. On the high seas, a new kind of ship emerged, the Kiev-Class Aircraft Carrier. These carriers were unlike anything seen before, combining the capabilities of a cruiser and an aircraft carrier, making them versatile and deadly. These were no ordinary ships. They were engineering marvels, designed to project power far from home shores. Their decks bristled with aircraft, and their hulls housed an array of weaponry. They were symbols of Soviet might, powerful, intimidating. Each Kiev-class carrier was a floating testament to the Soviet Union's industrial and military capabilities, a force to be reckoned with. These ships were not just tools of war, but also instruments of diplomacy, showing the world that the Soviet Union was a force to be taken seriously. Imagine the open ocean, vast and unending, waves crashing against the hull of a massive warship, the sound of the sea, the spray of salt water, and the sheer power of these vessels cutting through the waves. On the deck, aircraft stand ready, fighter jets, bombers, and helicopters all poised to take off at a moment's notice, each aircraft a piece of the larger puzzle of naval dominance. These were the tools of power projection, the ability to strike anywhere, anytime. The aircraft on these carriers extended the reach of the Soviet Navy far beyond its traditional boundaries. The Soviet Union, once landlocked, now had a way to reach across the globe. Their naval expansion was a clear message to the world. The Soviet Union was no longer confined by geography. The Kiev-class was a statement, a bold declaration of intent. These ships were not just about defense, they were about asserting dominance on the global stage. A statement that the Soviet Union was a global player. No longer content to be a regional power, the Soviet Navy was now a force with global reach and ambition. They wouldn't be confined to the shores anymore. The Soviet Navy was on the move, ready to challenge any adversary anywhere in the world. They would challenge the West on the open seas. And they did. The Cold War naval standoffs were a testament to the high stakes and the ever-present threat of conflict. The Soviet Union had a problem. Despite their formidable naval fleet, they faced a significant challenge in maintaining control over the vast expanses of the world's oceans. Their submarines, while powerful and technologically advanced, couldn't cover the immense distances required to project power effectively. Their submarines, while powerful, couldn't control the vast oceans. The Soviet naval strategy needed a new dimension, something that could bridge the gap between their underwater prowess and surface fleet capabilities. They needed a new solution. Enter the Kiev-class. These carriers were different. Unlike traditional aircraft carriers, which primarily focused on air superiority, the Kiev-class was designed to be a versatile platform, capable of multiple roles. They weren't just about launching aircraft. The Kiev-class could support a variety of missions, from anti-submarine warfare to surface combat, making them a formidable addition to the Soviet naval arsenal. They were hybrids, a mix of cruiser and carrier. This unique combination allowed them to carry both aircraft and heavy weaponry, providing a flexible response to different threats. Construction began in the late 1960s. The Soviet Union invested heavily in these ships, seeing them as a critical component of their naval strategy. The first ship, Kiev, took to the water in 1972. It was a significant milestone marking the beginning of a new era in Soviet naval power. 3 more followed: Minsk, Novorossiysk, and Baku. Each subsequent ship built upon the lessons learned from the previous ones, incorporating improvements and refinements, each one a testament to Soviet engineering. The design and construction of these ships showcased the Soviet Union's ability to innovate and adapt to new naval warfare requirements. They were big, over 850 feet long. This size allowed them to carry a significant number of aircraft and weapons, making them a powerful presence on the high seas. And they were packed with weapons, missiles, guns, and torpedoes. This heavy armament meant they could engage a variety of targets, from enemy ships to submarines and aircraft. The design was unique, a large flight deck at the stern. This layout allowed for efficient aircraft operations, with planes taking off and landing with ease. A powerful missile armament at the bow. This forward placement of missiles provided a strategic advantage, allowing the Kiev-class to strike first in a confrontation. This gave the Kievs flexibility. They could adapt to different combat scenarios, whether it was launching airstrikes, engaging surface targets, or defending against submarines. They could launch air attacks and defend themselves with equal ferocity. This dual capability made them a formidable force, capable of projecting power and defending Soviet interests across the globe. The Kiev-class bristled with weaponry. They were designed for both offense and defense. Their main punch, the P-500 Basalt anti-ship missile. These supersonic monsters could devastate enemy ships from hundreds of miles away. But that wasn't all. They also carried an array of surface-to-air missiles. These provided a protective bubble against enemy aircraft and missiles. Close-in weapon systems added another layer of defense. The air wing was equally impressive. The stars of the show were the Yak-38 Forger aircraft. These were vertical takeoff and landing fighters, not as capable as their Western counterparts, but they gave the Kievs a crucial air power capability. These behemoths needed serious power. They got it from 8 massive boilers. These generated steam to drive 4 turbines. The result? Over 200,000 horsepower, enough to propel these giants to speeds of over 30 knots. The range was impressive too, over 8,000 nautical miles at cruising speed. This meant the Kievs could sail for weeks without refueling. They could project power far from Soviet shores. Their size came at a cost. They were less maneuverable than smaller ships, but their speed and firepower made them formidable opponents. Section 5. Show of Force. The Kievs in action. The Kiev-class carriers were more than just symbols. They were active participants in the Cold War. They sailed the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, and the Pacific. They showed the flag and reminded the world of Soviet naval power. Their primary role was to protect Soviet submarines. These submarines, armed with nuclear missiles, were a key part of Soviet strategy. The carriers provided air cover and defended them from enemy attacks. They also conducted anti-submarine warfare themselves. Their helicopters and sonar systems hunted for NATO submarines. It was a tense game of cat and mouse beneath the waves. Section 6. Through the Iron Curtain. The Cold War impact. The arrival of the Kiev-class sent shockwaves through NATO. These massive ships, bristling with advanced weaponry and aircraft, represented a significant leap in Soviet naval capabilities. NATO's naval commanders were suddenly faced with a new and formidable challenge. For the first time, the Soviet Union had a credible carrier force. The Kiev-class carriers were not just symbols of Soviet engineering prowess, but also a clear message of their intent to project power far beyond their shores. This changed the balance of power at sea. NATO had to adapt. Strategies that had been in place for decades were suddenly obsolete. New tactics and technologies had to be developed to counter this emerging threat. The U.S. Navy, with its larger carriers, still held the advantage. These floating fortresses were the backbone of NATO's naval power, capable of projecting force anywhere in the world. However, the presence of the Kievs meant that the U.S. could no longer operate with impunity. But the Kievs forced them to be more cautious. Naval war games and strategic planning sessions became more intense, with every move and countermove being scrutinized. The stakes were higher, and the margin for error was smaller. They had to account for the threat posed by these new Soviet warships. Defense planning became more complex, with new layers of strategy being added to counter the multifaceted threat posed by the Soviet fleet. The Cold War was a time of constant tension. Every naval maneuver, every deployment was a potential flashpoint. The world watched as these two superpowers danced on the edge of conflict, each move calculated to gain an advantage without triggering a full-scale war. The Kievs were a symbol of that tension. They represented the Soviet Union's determination to challenge NATO's naval supremacy and were a constant reminder of the precarious balance of power. They were a reminder that the world was on a knife's edge. The presence of these powerful ships underscored the fragility of peace during the Cold War, a period where the threat of global conflict was ever present. Section 7. Beyond the Soviet Navy, new lives for the Kievs. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. The future of the Kiev-class was uncertain. The Russian Navy, facing economic hardship, couldn't afford to keep them all. Some were scrapped. Others found new life. The Kiev was sold to China and turned into a theme park. The Minsk also went to China, becoming a museum ship. The Novorossiysk was scrapped in India. Only the Admiral Gorshkov, renamed Vikramaditya, remains in service. It was extensively modernized and sold to India in 2013. It now serves as the flagship of the Indian Navy. Section 8. A lasting legacy. The enduring influence of the Kiev-class. The Kiev-class may be gone mostly, but their legacy lives on. They represented a turning point in Soviet naval history. They marked the Soviet Union's ambition to become a true blue-water navy. Their design influenced later Soviet carriers, like the Admiral Kuznetsov. They also pushed the West to innovate. The U.S. Navy continued to develop its carrier technology, leading to the massive supercarriers of today. The Kiev-class serves as a reminder of a bygone era, an era of superpower rivalry and technological innovation. Section 9. Conclusion. Giants of a bygone era. The Kiev-class aircraft carriers were more than just ships. They were symbols of an era. They represented the ambition and might of the Soviet Union. They challenged the West and changed the face of naval warfare. Today, only one remains in active service, but their story is far from over. They continue to fascinate and inspire. They are a reminder of the power and majesty of these giants of the Cold War seas.